one of the most lavish parties on New Year's Eve 2012 started aboard a rented 747. The jet, which was turned into a casino, flew to Australia, where attendees, including Leonardo DiCaprio and Jamie Foxx, rang in the new year aboard a yacht.
Then they quickly bundled back into the 747, flew to Las Vegas at the highest speed possible, and were shuttled to a nightclub where they were able to do the countdown again. They basically beat the clock.
Despite its celebrity-filled guest list, this was no Hollywood production. The host was a Malaysian financier, Joe Low. His fortune made the whole thing happen. It also allegedly came from what appears to be one of the biggest heists in history, the 1MDB scandal.
The people who were alleged to have done this theft allegedly stole $4.5 billion. That's a lot more than even some of the worst dictators in history have stolen.
Low isn't alleged to have done this alone. Goldman Sachs and some of its bankers are said to have played a key role. The bank has just reached a multi-billion-dollar settlement with the U.S. government for its involvement.
It touched Wall Street, it touched Hollywood, it went to Vegas, and there's the most powerful investment bank on the planet right at the center of it.
So let's take a look at the scheme that allegedly helped fund that party and many others, the players that allegedly benefited from it, and the fallout for them and the bank as the plan began to unravel.
From the start, 1MDB was a very strange animal.
1MDB, which stands for One Malaysia Development Berhad, was a sovereign wealth fund created in 2009 by Prime Minister Najib Razak. Though it was Low's idea, and he ran the fund behind the scenes.
When we think of sovereign wealth funds, we think of a huge pot of money, the savings account of a country, but 1MDB was part of a new class of sovereign wealth funds that were kind of in vogue.
So the idea is you borrow money, you're paying the interest on it, but the payoff, the benefit from the money you bought is so much better that the economy is better off for taking on this debt.
1MDB touted big economic development projects, including turning Malaysia's capital city, Kuala Lumpur, into the Wall Street of Asia. To borrow the money needed, 1MDB's leadership turned to Goldman Sachs and Tim Leissner, the bank's chairman in the region.
For Goldman, there's two things at stake here. There's a lot of money. 1MDB is willing to pay them huge fees to raise money quickly and quietly. There's also, this is a new frontier for Goldman in Asia. They think there's going to be a lot of investment, a lot of economic growth, and they want to be the U.S. investment bank that's leading the way.
In total, Goldman raised $6.5 billion for 1MDB through 3 bond sales in 2012 and 2013. But what stood out were the fees the bank collected on these deals. On the 3 deals, Goldman earned about $600 million. That's 10 times what banks typically earn on bond issuances.
It was a total red flag, right? It just didn't make sense. As we got deeper and deeper and deeper into it, the more it didn't make sense.
Prosecutors now allege that some $4.5 billion of the money raised was stolen, siphoned off by Low, Leissner, and others. But it would be another 2 years from the time the bonds were issued before the scheme started to unravel.
When it really got our attention, though, was what I like to think of as the first island on the archipelago of scandals.
In 2015, the Wall Street Journal reported 1MDB paid what appeared to be an inflated price for power plants in Malaysia. The fund purchased these assets from a company that then used the overpayment to make a donation to a charity chaired by Najib. That charity then used the money to fund schools in districts where Najib needed votes.
And then within weeks, we got a tip and we were able to get documents that showed that nearly $700 million of money from 1MDB found its way into the Prime Minister's bank account. And that was explosive.
To this day, Najib denies wrongdoing. He previously claimed the $681 million was a donation from the King of Saudi Arabia. But after the news broke, the Federal Bureau of Investigation initiated a probe into the affair.
Everybody knew that there was this 1MDB scandal kind of boiling, there was this scandal with the charities, but you couldn't connect them. That's why it was an archipelago.
With increased scrutiny on 1MDB and its spending, the Journal reported in 2015 that a $1.4 billion payment 1MDB had said it made to its partner in Abu Dhabi, the International Petroleum Investment Company, had gone missing. That payment was said to have been made to an IPIC subsidiary called Abar. Documents provided to the Wall Street Journal show that a payment was made to Abar Investments Limited. Only problem?
There is no Abar Investments Limited within the corporate structure of Abar. And that was something that became a pattern through all of our reporting. We found that there was these lookalike companies frequently used, and that was a big revelation for us.
As its scandals spread outside Malaysia, 1MDB was struggling to repay more than $11 billion in debt. Because the money was stolen, it wasn't invested. Without investment returns, the fund couldn't pay back the bonds.
Eventually, all of the islands in the archipelago were connected when the Justice Department issued this huge complaint where they explained all of the money flows that we couldn't see behind the scenes.
And Lowe was allegedly at the center of it all.
This guy, who was by all rights the mastermind behind the fund, was buying luxury condos in New York and London. He was throwing these, crazy parties in Las Vegas. And there was a pattern of behavior with him and some other people that made it clear that, money came from somewhere.
And then there was this. Lowe was also the financier behind a little-known movie studio called Red Granite Pictures, which was run by Najib's stepson. With the money from Lowe, the studio made The Wolf of Wall Street.
This is the greatest company in the world!
It was never clear exactly what Lowe did at 1MDB and why he was even there.
In investment banking, you never want someone hanging around the hoop who doesn't have a good reason to be there, especially when there's public entities involved, because that's often a sign that someone's getting a take.
But those days are over. In October, Lowe agreed to forfeit more than $700 million in assets U.S. authorities sought to seize, including real estate, a luxury yacht, and a private jet, according to a settlement. Lowe did this without pleading guilty and has denied any wrongdoing. Lowe is also missing.
He's one of the world's biggest global financial fugitives, and based somewhere in China, though we don't know entirely where.
As the scandal unfolded, Najib was able to squash some of the investigations internally. But in 2018, he lost his bid for re-election. His opponent ran on an anti-corruption platform.
And that then unraveled everything for Najib. They raided his house. They found boxes of cash. They found millions of dollars in jewels.
Last month, a Malaysian court sentenced him to 12 years imprisonment and fined him nearly $50 million in what will be the first in a string of cases against the former prime minister. Najib has denied wrongdoing, and his lawyer said Najib would appeal the court's decision. As for Leisner, he is no longer with Goldman. He pled guilty in 2018 to conspiring to launder money and violate foreign anti-bribery laws.
He'll likely be sentenced, but in the meantime, he's cooperating with the U.S. government as a witness against other parties, including his former employer.
For Goldman, this scandal may have just come to a close, with the bank agreeing to pay about $2.8 billion to the U.S. government and admit wrongdoing, according to people familiar with the matter. This settlement follows one earlier this month with the government of Malaysia, where the bank agreed to pay $2.5 billion.
It's not an accident that the investment bank at the center of this is Goldman Sachs. It's a firm that prides itself on being a little bit edgier, and it has worked out remarkably well for them for a long time, but every 10 or 15 years, it blows up, and it always blows up in an sort of an unpredictable way.
Even with Goldman's settlement, the 1MDB saga continues. Much of 1MDB's missing billions is still unaccounted for.
And the only one I think who really knows where everything is Joe Lowe. And he has no interest in telling anyone at this point. So a lot of that may stay secret.
I think it's going to take a long time, and we may never know the full extent of what happened in 1MDB.